Good evening to all. Thank you for joining us this evening. You could be anywhere in the world, but you decided to come spend time with us. My name is Kamar Gwynn, co-founder of the Black Prism Group. I'm joined by my colleague, Michael Hatcher. Together, we make up Black Prism Group. Black Prism Group is an educational consultancy dedicated to building out platforms and structures to help support students, families, and communities in achieving agency. And by agency, we mean the opportunity to actualize a vision for themselves and their lives. Hatcher, introduce yourself, please.
Hey, I'm Michael Hatcher. I'm one of the founders of the Black Prism Group. Couldn't have said it any better. We were concerned with the inability of schools to do the simple functions that they're supposed to do. And so we decided that we would sit down and try to work what are the issues that families are facing and what can we do to help them. And it seemed that agency was the thing, the ability to determine for yourself the outcomes you want to see happen. It seems like schools too often try to tell people what they need. They don't listen sometimes to what people say they need. And so it's very difficult for people to interface with the school and get what they need. That makes sense.
And so we're live tonight with the first of a three-part series dedicated to using literacy for the end goal of liberation. And we are joined this evening by a very special panelist, but as well as a very special guest. This individual and I have a long run of history in advocating for student needs. The premise behind this actual show started off behind literacy. This individual and I took a trip to Marcus Bookstores here in Oakland, California. Marcus Bookstores is one of the oldest, if not the oldest, independent Black bookstore in the country, in the nation. And we went there and I actually picked up a copy of this brother's book. And afterwards, we had a long chat and we said, what can we do together and how can we partner to do something different for our community? To make sure that we have an opportunity to put value in the hands for folks that really don't get the chance to be able to be up front and center. And out of this comes this collaboration. And so without further ado, I would like to bring forward one of the greatest friends that I have and colleague, producer of this show, Dr. Charles Cole.
What's up, fellas?
Peace.
How y'all doing, man?
Good to be here.
I'm happy to be here with you, brothers, man. I'm super excited. So I'm honored to be a guest. Sorry about the background music, but it is what it is. And yeah, man, however y'all want to start.
Well, Dr. Cole, can you share a little bit about just your broader work, energy converters, the work that you do nationwide?
Yeah, absolutely, man. So energy converters is basically a term that I built. And in that term, what it meant is that energy doesn't have a value until we give it one, right? So I was born in, I was born in Chicago, and my parents was dope fiends when I was younger, and I lived in a bunch of shelters. I'm in my Oakland office right now. I lived in the shelter of the Salvation Army a few blocks down that way. Now, I could use a lot of that stuff as the reason and like, yo, this is why I'm not doing X, Y, and Z, but I converted that to use that. I think that's a blessing. I think the fact that I've been this resilient and been able to kind of build some stuff, it's really helped me. So that's where that term energy converter came from. What we do is we focus on building agency with the end users of education, and as students, their parents, and their community, meaning that I work on a lot of policy stuff and I want to change a lot of policy stuff and improve it. But what are we doing for the kid for Monday morning, right? Like usually policy change, the kids that help us and the parents that help us get that change usually are gone by the time those things take effect. So I want my parents and my community and my students to be able to have a fighting chance at the very least. So it's like, let me give you the game and let me let you know what I'm saying? Let me let you be able to fight on some level for yourself and for what you need. The other part of agency is for them to understand what quality is and whether they getting it or not. The hardest part of my job is really showing Black folks that they deserve better than what they getting. And I've been blessed to be able to do education work all across the country. So that's the crux of what my work is. And luckily, because it's my company, I get to pick who I partner with. And I'm just really blessed and happy to be partnering with you two brothers.
Yeah, you could have chosen any area of focus for this particular project and some of the work that you do. But I remember before listening to you and you shared a little bit about in your personal journey, even though all of the things that you have gone through, how literacy was a big kind of linchpin in helping to support you and propel you to your actual success today. Can you talk to us a little bit about, there's 1,001 issues we could address for Black students and students of color right in the school building. Why did you pick literacy, and why is that so important to focus on?
Man, one of my OGs, man, Dr. Howard Fuller, just a dope cat. He was in the building when Malcolm X gave the Ballad of the Bullet speech. And he has this saying that, you know, we used to fight just to have a seat at the counter, at the table. And now we at the counter and we can't read the menu. Black literacy is a real big issue. And let me just tell you how wild it is. When I moved to Oakland, I lived in Chicago and Kentucky first, but I had this super thick accent at Lafayette Elementary School. They was going to put me in special ed because my accent was so thick. And the only thing that saved me, when I lived in Kentucky, they were crazy about literacy. Like they had these reading competitions. I had to stand up and read all the time. So Thursday was read out loud day. And it got to me, and I was the best reader in the class. So in the span of a week, Mike and Kamar, I went from about to be put into special needs classes, right? Mm. To being asked to be part of the GATE program. That's how flippant and how lucky like I had to be, which has put me on a certain path and trajectory, even though, you know, I got smoke for all the schools I went to, you feel me? Even Cal State Hayward, if we ever need to get to that part, and my doctoral program. But I get to sit here as a doctor. I get to sit here as an entrepreneur. I get to sit here as a CEO and have this conversation with you. And reading played a really big part in that. And reading, and I think y'all gonna talk about it later, but it's not just being able to look at the words and say them. It's being able to comprehend and make some meaning and take different text and put it together to build thoughts. So that's why literacy is so important. And we just come from a people where people keep saying, yo, we can't teach these kids because they poor. We can't do this because of that or whatever. The largest growth in literacy in the United States was directly after enslaved Africans were freed, meaning these people, all they had was a little bit of dignity left and no money, but they made sure that they could read, and that's what they fought for. And we risked life and limb to be able to learn how to read. So I just reject those notions around Black folks and literacy or how much we care or don't care about education.
I know that you are tight on time, but I do have one more question, perhaps.
As long as you need me, brother, whatever you need, you good.
Thank you. Wondering throughout the country and in your work, what do you maybe see as some of the barriers between that bridge between home and school in a relationship to actually getting that message that you just put forward home to families? I know that today we'll be talking about this, and this is part of the platform of getting this word out there. But what do you see as one of the major obstacles or barriers from that story that you just shared and that brief chance of opportunity that you had that avoided you from when I went to law school? They recommended that I was dyslexic, right? So, and I was 20 something years old, right? And it was just happen chance that something happened in my life as well. I was able to avoid that. What do you think the disconnect is?
Man, I think it's a few things. And what I'm about to say is not fair at all. But even with my students, we don't use the term fair just because that's just life ain't fair. But you got to be an active player and fighter in your education or your kids' education. Like, you can't expect the people that used to own us in a system that was not built by us, that has 80% white educators, mostly women, that come into Black neighborhoods, you know what I'm saying, to like in a system that has not taught us well in mass. We can't just keep expecting to drop our kids off and they get everything they need. And again, Black parents are working, Black parents are tired. Like, they set the school meeting to be at 10 a.m. like somebody not working or whatever the case is. But you got to know this language and you got to be there to fight. You ain't got to know everything, but you got to be there to do quality control checks. Mm-hmm. You got to be there to ask questions. You got to, hey, I teach parents that teachers have units. Like, I teach parents that like teachers are supposed to have a goal of what they teaching your child, right? I ask parents to ask about it. Hey, what's the goal for the end of this unit? And when you show up and even ask those type of questions, they start to look at your kid different. They start to look at you different. Oh, I can't really pull that mess on Miss Johnson that I might pull on such and such. You feel me? So I think that, those are things that I would say is the chasm we have to break, is that we just can't, if by the grace of God, you put your kid in the school and they handle everything, God bless you. You are a very lucky individual. But Kamar, you and I both got friends. We got people that we grew up with, especially growing up in a town where them kids got abandoned. And people are going to say, well, y'all only care about test scores and this. It's not that we only care about test scores. It's that I know what those test scores represent and what they mean. And what they mean for Black kids and for brown kids is some of them kids going to die. Some of them kids going to end up in jail. Some of them kids' lives is going to be cut short. You feel me? So So that's what I would say, is that this is a battle for life. It ain't a battle to make a school look good or test scores, or I don't care what type of school you choose for your kid. I think Black folks have sovereignty. And if you want a charter school, a private school, a traditional school, homeschool, I think that's your business. I'm not going to ever ask Black people to sacrifice their kids to any system for the sake of a system that don't love them.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And, you know, the shirt that you have on, it says my love language is agency. And so at the end of this 3-part series, we hope to, one, set a particular framing about why it is important to have literacy and agency. But then in the second part of the conversation for next week, we'll be talking about what is that language in the school system and structures? How do we demystify what some of those key things? We use a lot of acronyms in education. It's a veil and it's a barrier that is really hard for parents to be able to break through. And then lastly, in the third part of the series, we'll be actually talking about tools that you can use in those conversations with the parent-teacher conferences, et cetera, when you show up there. Before we bring in the panel, just want to give you an opportunity maybe to say maybe some parting thoughts as we introduce our panel and get into our discussion for this evening.
Well, one, I'm just a huge fan of you, Kamar, and Mr. Hatcher. I'm looking forward to getting to know you better, man. I'm so blessed and proud to be able to be part of this and to be out the way and just watch y'all be brilliant. Y'all let me know how I can help, how I can block and tackle. And then finally, you know, I'm very aware how I look on this thing with my nappy hair, with my chain and my grill or whatever. And I think that stuff is important. I think that whoever's watching this is seeing 3 Black men right now with 3 different looks, 3 different backgrounds, and we not one thing. And, you know, don't let anybody define. I got more degrees than most of the people that I meet, and gold teeth. You feel me? And I ain't never did nothing illegal. It is what it is. You know what I'm saying? And I think that the more we get to see ourselves represented, because when I was a kid living in North Oakland, I didn't see representations of myself in places of success. The teachers I had wasn't cool cats. They suits was boxy, and I didn't relate to that. So I think if you're a Black person or a brown person, be you and be successful and show that journey, because you're a modeling for some kids somewhere, and it changes things. It really, truly does. God has truly blessed me, man. And I got love for the both of y'all. Go be great. It's enough mediocre people in the world. We don't need no more. You 2 cats, go be great, and I'll be here to help. Mike, you gonna say something to me, brother? You didn't say nothing the whole time I was here, B.
I was listening. I'm just, you know, when people are speaking and there's stuff being dropped, you got to listen. You can't just start cutting them off.
You can cut me off any day. You got it.
I will say this: the agency thing is really important, because if Black people had more agency, it wouldn't be an issue if you had a grill in. If it was your business, if it was your company, if it was your power, if it was your water, nobody would be able to tell you what to do with your mouth. Nobody would be able to tell you what you should wear. But when you're in other people's spaces, you have to abide by the rules or the norms that are set in those spaces. And so that's why we need to work for agency, right? I'd love to be in a space where some brothers could wear grills, some brothers could wear suits. And that's our decision, not everybody else's decision.
And you in that space right now, Hatch.
Absolutely.
So I'm in that space right now. And I'm wearing a suit. So let's see what happens.
And you look good.
But it's not boxy. It's not boxy, though. It looks good.
Okay. I love suits. I love suits. I love suits. I'm just saying, you know, I agree with you. I just want kids to be able to see every part of us, like that's just highlighted, man. But y'all gonna do some great stuff, man. And I just appreciate you, brothers. And also the world don't see Black men just congratulating and saluting and supporting other Black men. They usually see us, you know, showing our, you know, growling at each other or getting ready to fight, man. I love you, brothers. Kamar, I got real love for you, dog. Mike, I plan on having that same love. And you know, and I want to make sure I'm talking with my support and not just hollow terms. So cool. Y'all go Absolutely. Be great, fam.
Appreciate you, brother. Thank you.
All right. Peace out.
All right. You take care.
All right, y'all. We have a very exciting panelist for this evening. I will let Michael Hatcher introduce our first guest, and I'll follow by the introduction of our second guest, and we'll bring in our panel for what I hope to be is a robust and perhaps even a debatable conversation, right, with some key points to get us in conversation around using literacy for the end goal of liberation.
So when I think about what a teacher should be, or when I think about what an administrator should be, or when I think about the person that I would like to have in front of Black students, this person springs to mind every time, first and foremost. Christine Hatcher has been in education as long as I've known her. She's gotten results everywhere she's gone. She's been Administrator of the Year multiple times. She is loved. She is respected. She is a person. She's also one of the equity chairs for West Contra Costa Unified School District. She is deeply committed to getting outcomes for students, Black, brown, white. And that's important because getting outcomes for students is what we're supposed to do. And too often we have conversations about what should happen or what could happen in the future, but she's got her feet on the ground making things happen right now. And so our first panelist is Christine Hatcher.
Christine Hatcher will be joined by Shantae Joseph Edwards. Shantae Joseph Edwards is a parent in the program that I run for Berkeley Unified School District. As Hatcher was introducing Christine Hatcher, he said, this is the ideal administrator, ideal teacher. This is the ideal parent. She has been pushing me to grow as an individual. She has been pushing me to grow the program that our son participates in Berkeley Unified, the Emoja program. She is a very creative and people-driven program manager with significant experience in building efficient and inclusive youth-based programming. We actually have consulted over the summer in some of the curriculum stuff that we have been doing in the classroom. And I couldn't think of anyone better to join our conversation to, one, have a parent perspective, but two, to show the world what it looks like to have an active and engaged parent as we are pushing literacy for the end goal of liberation. Please welcome Shantae Joseph Edwards.
Do you guys want to say anything before we get started?
Wow, that's a lot to live up to. I hope, I hope that I can live up to that. So thank you. That was really kind. Appreciate it.
And thank you, Kamar, for that introduction. And thank you for all the work that you do within the Berkeley Unified School District. It's because of educators like you that I can be involved as a parent. So thank you.
Thank you for being here. Mr. Hatcher.
Here we go. So let's jump into it a little bit. So you often hear people tell their kids, your ancestors read under the threat of being tortured, right? They tried to learn to read and they could have been tortured for learning to read. They had their eyes plucked out and they had their hands cut off, or people died for you to learn to read. But here's the first question. Why did our ancestors want to read? I mean, what was the benefit of reading that our ancestors saw? Anyone?
I was going to say, Shantae, you want to go first?
Sure. Something that Dr. Cole said really struck me, and it was that, after the enslaved people were freed during that period of Reconstruction, it was a really pivotal time for Black folks. In fact, we started 5,000 community schools. We started 37 historically Black colleges and universities. So when we talk about why it was important, I think, the theme of liberation through literacy was exactly that. I think that's the most important, to liberate the mind, to open doors, to be a part of a society that grows and builds for Black people.
Mm-hmm.
I thought of it a little differently. Initially, when I think about why did Black folks learn to read, or why was literacy so important? In my mind, it was for their survival, right? There were things that were happening to them. There were things being put upon them. And so just to be informed, some really basic things, right? To understand what was going on. That was my thinking, that's really where that push and desire to read, I guess I should say read, not be literate, right? Because those are two different things. But this desire to read, to have access and information, that was super important. I don't know so much if it was about wanting to participate, if that makes sense. I think they were fine to have their own thing. But it was a safety, for me, it was like a safety thing. And I'm wondering, it's interesting now I think about it. When did we transition to wanting to acquire the same things? Yeah. Is that a learned, obviously that was a learned thing as folks defined what success was, but I think to read came from wanting to be safe.
Right. I have a question to follow up on that. You're going to see Kamar smile, I think. So nobody said books. Nobody said a book, right? I didn't hear anybody say our ancestors learned to read because they wanted to have a book, right? Nobody said they wanted to read Chaucer. Nobody even said they wanted to read Richard Wright. No, I thought that's what literacy was, right? You get a book. Of course, that's facetious, but.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know what books entered into. I mean, if Black folks wanted to read any book, it was going to be a Bible.
It was going to be a Bible. I was going to
be a Bible.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it wasn't going to be. I mean, that was all. I mean, that's a whole different conversation, right? But
I mean, think about it. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. But during that period of kidnap, torture, murder, and rape, they weren't trying to read the Bible because they wanted to hear the frilly words. They thought there was freedom in that book.
Yeah.
They thought possibly that if I got into this book like those people got into this book, or like we were into this book before we came here, because the Congolese, Congo was Christian way before the white people showed up. We could find our way out of this mess, right? But again, it wasn't about the book itself. It was about what the book would bring. And so that's the question that we're asking today about literacy versus reading. It seems that all these people want your child to read, but possibly what we need to do is become literate to be able to use that ability to achieve an outcome.
Mm-hmm. And Hatcher, that's the second time we've heard that comment, that it wasn't, not from you, but from you and the panelists, right? So can you break down and highlight the distinctions for us between reading, i.e. picking up a book? I think Charles also mentioned it in the beginning, not just reading a book for quote unquote pleasure, for leisure, but being literate and then using literacy. What are the different distinctions between those two ends of the spectrum?
Right. I'll start with the National Assessment of Adult Literacy, right? In 2003, they said literacy is the ability to use printed and written information to function in society and to achieve your goals and to develop yourself, right? Your potential and yourself. So that's what literacy is. Reading is taking in information from a text, but it doesn't mean you're using that information to achieve a goal. It doesn't mean you're using that information to make yourself better as a person. It just means you could take in information from a text. It also means you could possibly comprehend the text. You could read a book and somebody could ask you a bunch of questions about it and you could answer those questions. You could do it spectacularly. That doesn't mean you're going to make your life better. And for some reason right now, I want to quote Dead Prez, but I won't.
Please do. Please do.
And so that's what we've got to differentiate between the fact of being literacy, that I can use this tool to get what I want, and being a reader, which means I could passively take in information and possibly regurgitate what somebody told me that I should regurgitate with this reading.
I mean, there's a little bit more like to reading than that. I mean, part of it is making sense, right? So we can take in information, we can activate schema based on whatever it is that we've read, and then we kind of make meaning for ourselves. As kind of the higher end when we think about it. So not just merely like decoding sounds and blending and doing all that. Like reading is actually sense making. And so in some ways, I would disagree a little bit, Hatcher. I think it can be more active depending on how you take that information, right? And you can actually, it can become something. I think when I think about literacy and this comes out of other conversations that we've had. It's like kids come to school with a literacy, like they know stuff. They know how to maneuver. When we put them in a different space, it's like, how do I maneuver in this space? And I think a lot of times as educators, we say they don't know anything, when really what we're saying is they don't know how to function in this space. But when they do figure out how to function in this space, like we never think that far, right? Because they're going to figure it out. Like they're going to figure out a way that works for them. But I think because sometimes as educators, we get stuck in, I have to teach them to be literate. Like they don't understand, when really maybe we should be considering they don't necessarily understand this space. But when they do figure out what works for them, what are we going to do? Like, what are we going to do once they figure out how they're going to be in this space?
So then let me ask a follow-up question there, because I'm not arguing with that. I think literacy, reading is sense making. But the question is, does learning to read make you literate? Because you could learn to read and not necessarily be literate. That's a question, but.
Right. No, because they're different.
Okay. Yeah, because like I said, there is a lot. I would agree. There's a lot more to reading as somebody who's taught kids to read than just like comprehending. Right. But I don't know that that just because I can't say that every kid I've taught to comprehend well makes the best decisions out in the world. Which those good decisions out in the world is what I would consider literacy. And so I'm wondering, how do we bridge that gap? Which kind of leads me to my next question. Right? What would the goal of a Black literacy be? What problems would allow us to solve, and what potentials would we be able to develop if Black people were learning to be literate in school?
It's a solid question. I think one, it will help us make the transition between what it seems like we were kind of discussing before, where we wanted to become literate to stop something, right? We wanted to become literate to, somebody put in the comments that they read Education of Blacks in the South, and that there was a quote from a woman in there, and she said, I wanted to learn how to read so that the white store owner or the merchant couldn't cheat me anymore, right? It was to stop something, right? But I think the difference between that and then moving on to literacy is that literacy is more proactive, right? It's not a response to trying to stop something, it's more proactive. And so for one, I think it puts us and puts our children in a mindset to say, dream big, and then backwards plan from that, right? And so I think that is something that, because we're caught so much in the rat race and the day-to-day, there is an opportunity sometimes for us to sit back and reflect and then chart some things out. So I think making that transition to literacy allows us to be able to step back and say, not as a response to something, right? But to actualize a plan that we might have for ourselves is ultimately for me, how I would define agency, and wonder if other folks would have particular thoughts. And her son might be watching. And so maybe Shantae might have some words for her son to say, this is the difference between why I want you to really pay attention to literacy and not necessarily just reading the books that they give you at school.
Absolutely. And that is a conversation that we have, and he is listening per usual. I think that started though with him at home, right? Me reading to him as a child. And if anybody on here has kids, you know that your kids will ask 27 questions before you even get to the third word of a page. And I feel like that's so key, right? That's where they get the kind of foundation and the building blocks to then pick up a book on their own and not just read the words that are on the page, but to really take it in and process it. And what does it mean? And what action goes behind what I'm reading? So
I love it. Modeling and showing those actions and taking time within the home to build in those structures to make sure that it happens. I think sometimes we leave it up to students who are still developing executive function skills to believe that because we purchased the book, they're actually going to pick it up and read it. And you just talked about setting up the home in a way that you structure that into your conversations, into the way that you do things at home. So kudos to you for that. Wonder if there's any thoughts, again, around that, using literacy to be able to dream and then to set a course of action in terms of not being as a response to be protective from something happening to us, to more actualizing our dreams and then getting it out there.
I'll just say, it's funny that some people would say, I would say, that all of Black history in this country can be written as one of two things: resisting against or fighting for. Right. A lot of times we talk about Black people as being passive, right? Like we just sat there while people beat the crap out of us and we didn't do anything. But literally our entire history in this country has been resisting against somebody trying to make us do something we didn't want to do, or be in a space we didn't want to be in, or fighting to be in a space we wanted to be in. And I wonder, because I know Chris has talked about this before, if this whole conversation in schools around equity is the right conversation to have, because equity is you passively waiting for somebody to come along and do something to you so you can respond. Where agency is you going out like Shantae's son and doing something that's going to make me happier, or I'm going to enjoy. I'm going to pick up this book because I want to, not because some lady in a classroom or some guy in a classroom told me to pick up a book. I'm going to pick up this book because it's going to help me make me a better person, or it's going to help me just enjoy myself in this time that I have. I don't know, but Chris, you've talked about that a lot. And
you know what I was thinking as I was listening to Shantae talk about, like, about her son and like his choices, and what immediately struck me was, if I was the teacher, if I was his teacher, like, shouldn't I be paying attention to the things that he's choosing? Because those are the things that resonate with him, right? So he is giving me a window into not only what interests him, but what is important to him. What are the things that he is making connections with and to, So when we talk about what kids bring to school, he didn't just merely choose the book because the book was entertaining. It activated something. Maybe it was something familiar. Maybe it was something that he wanted to know because maybe that's the culture in his home, right? When we are curious, this is what we do. So when we talk about like what kids bring, that's the type of thing I think that we miss a lot of times. And so to that point of equity, educators say equity is giving kids what they need. But the part I think we leave out is how do we recognize that? Because that takes some real intentionality to really look at kids and what they are bringing, and not looking for the right answer. So like we need to step away from that. I saw someone put in the comments that, when you talk about reading, you have to talk about writing. They go hand in hand. Well, yeah, readers read good writers and writers read a lot. Right? I mean, yes, they do go hand in hand, but a child who writes his or her own or their own material, their own stories is just as valuable as a published author, because you can feel a million different ways, in the course of a day about something. And so just that, to own that, we talked about agency, like just kind of owning that. And I think if we can find a way to make that really the conversation, then we would see more equitable outcomes for kids, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I have a follow-up because I know that there's some educators also tuning in and watching, and I'm sitting before what I consider to be administrative greatness, and what I want to know is that at a particular time, right? I read a book. I think it was like the 1 Minute Coach or something like that, right? And as an administrator, you got 1,001 things that are going on at the school site, but you might just have 1 second in the lunchroom, right, on your way to go do another thing, to talk to a teacher, right? A 1 minute coaching conversation around what are the ways and how can a teacher engage and tap into what you just talked about, right? Because I believe that is crucial, but if they don't have the steps to be able to do that, I think that that's a missed opportunity. And then on the back end of that, Shantae, maybe if you can come in and maybe share a little bit about what do you wish a teacher or an administrator would ask you about your son, right? So that you could share and open up the opportunity for a conversation to be able to say, this is what my son is actually all about.
I think something struck me that Miss Chris said about, as educators, sometimes you get these kids and you think that, they don't know anything. It's our job to tell them what we know and this is what it is. I think what would be helpful, very helpful, is if educators did exactly what she just said. What is this child bringing to the table? What are the practices at home? For me, my mom didn't give us answers for anything. If we had a question, it was like Encyclopedia Britannica. Have fun, right? And it's now 2021, and I can't tell my son Julian to go get the encyclopedia. But what I can do is teach him responsible ways to navigate the internet. What I can do is get you a library card and take you to the library, get your bus pass so you can go to the library. And so that when you come to school, you not only have an arsenal, you're able to, what's the word I'm looking for? I think it's a big ask to ask educators to say, yes.
Yeah.
I think it's a big ask to ask educators to pull something out of a child like that. Like, what are you doing at home? What are you hungry to get? But I think if we can start at home and teaching our kids to go to school and say, hey, this is what I'm interested in. Can we talk about this? I think they would make the whole environment easier to navigate.
And to that end, Chantal, you talked about it's a lot to ask. And I think it is a lot to ask when we have agreed that the current structures and systems that our kids show up to school with is the way that perhaps it should be done. And I think, Hatcher and I kind of have a lot of conversations around the purpose of school. And Hatcher has identified, I think, about 3 things that he really has nailed down in terms of what the school is actually able to do for Black students. And I wanted to know if Hatcher would be able to speak towards those goals of education that we commonly find for the institution in terms of educating Black students, and on the back end, maybe to have a quick dialogue on whether or not we see those things replicated in the school spaces that we show up to and engage with?
Ooh, that's a good question. So I'm gonna give you a big answer to a big question. So I'm gonna start and I'm gonna walk my way, but in the end, I'm gonna answer your question. So public education goes from literacy for liberation. We talked about that before. At the end of Reconstruction, Black people were we advocated for the public school. Let's be clear. It was Black people that said, hey, we need schools. So we got schools, and within a generation, literally, we have cities, we have businesses, we have Black Wall Street, we own things. We've taken over pretty much the government in North Carolina. I mean, all these things have just happened in a short period of time. I'm going to say it. Brown Board of Education comes in somewhere around 1952. And Brown versus Board of Education really effectively did two things. One, it ended racial segregation in the schools. And two, it effectively eliminated Black teachers and administrators. Yeah. And in a short span of time, we went from educating ourselves for liberation or literacy to another group of people educating our kids and complaining they couldn't read.
But Hatcher, isn't that what Black people wanted? They wanted to get in those schools, right?
Well, no, I mean, so no.
They were like, no.
Oh, okay.
I mean, I'm not going to get into it, but the initial argument that was made was not separate but unequal in education. It was separate but unequal in facilities.
Come on.
Actually, right? And so it was access.
Yep.
Right. If I live down the street from a school, why should I have to trot my child across town to go to school? So it wasn't even about it wasn't about the quality of facility. It was merely like, if I live in this neighborhood, I should be allowed to go to my neighborhood school.
Right.
We lost control of that narrative, right?
Yeah. And somewhere along the way, the story got changed to, oh, they're receiving a substandard education or a subpar education. That was never the case. But so that leads into what Kamar was talking about. So public education, in the arguing for it, has had three goals for students. One, they want to make good citizens. Want to make people who can participate in the democracy and vote and serve the public. Two, it wanted to make good employees, people who had skills they could take with them or contribute to the society as a whole. And three, somewhere along the lines, it became socially mobile. Like you can go to school, get a job, or go to school, get a degree, and you can change your social status. Those are the three big ideas that education had. What people don't realize is public education never had those ideas for Black people. It was never an idea for Black people. Literally, expressly for Black people, the idea of public education was the exact opposite. Disenfranchisement. We want to make sure that they get educated, but that they don't vote and they don't participate in the political economy or the political life of the society. Two, we want to make sure that they are trained for the most menial jobs. And three, we want to make sure they accept the fact that they are a lower status and that they stay at the lowest rung of a racial caste system. That's what public education had as a goal for Black people. But the joy of it for us was, before Brown versus Board, we educated ourselves and we could just like poo-poo that. Whatever, you guys are talking crazy. I educate my own kids. I give them what I want. But as soon as white people took over the education of Black students, those three goals came back in force. And so that leads me to my next question, right? And the next question is, look at what we said about what Black literacy should be. And looking at what these goals of education are, it seems like these things are normative. We talk about how it should be in the future. It will be good if Black kids learn to read. It would be good if Black kids had agency. It would be good if Black kids were literate. But these are all things that aren't true right now. These are things that we want to be true, that ought to be true. So my question is, what does school do for Black people today? Right? If you had to describe what school is right now and what it does for Black people, what would you say? Don't all answer at once.
Shantae, can we start with you and then maybe no? I'm like, I don't know, because it's hard because I'm there every day.
I don't want to lose my government job.
Because, because here's the thing, I have, and I'm just going to be transparent, I have an issue with trying to be very careful with my words. I'm just wondering where the disconnect came, where we left the entire charge to educate our children to school. We see other ethnic groups. For instance, I had a very close Jewish friend growing up. She went to Hebrew school. I have one of my best friends is Chinese. She went to Chinese school. On the weekends, they learned their native tongue. They picked up some cultural know-how. It affirmed their identity. Where did that disconnect come for us that we just gave our children over to a system that had no intention of educating in the way that they educate their own? And then we say, well,
So it sounds like in there you are saying something about what public education is right now.
Right. I think so. This is harder for me because I am a third generation teacher.
Come on.
I'm a third generation teacher. And I was going to say, I went to Catholic school, and I've commented, to friends that for Black folks, Catholic school served a purpose insofar as this was the best education that our families felt like they could afford to give us. Mm-hmm. And I happened to go to a Catholic school where almost every teacher was Black. Mm-hmm. And most of the kids were Black. Shout out to St. Columba Elementary School right there on Alcatraz. I mean,
man, I went there for kindergarten. That's ironic.
Oh my God. So, so what I'm thinking, Hatcher, when you say that, and Shantae, why did we turn over? I think that we turned over because at some point we felt like schools represented freedom. I think Kamar said that at the beginning, right? Like we read, we learned how to read so that we could be safe, so we could stop things from happening to us. It's like, so when did it become that and started to keep up? Because I think the acquisition of things began to represent freedom. School represented freedom, not so much that we wanted to be like others, to be like, but to be free. And at some point, because we lost control of that narrative, around, like, even around Brown v. Board of Education, but even prior, there was another case prior to that, that you become tired. And so I think some of it is a fatigue. You're constantly fighting, and it's a struggle. I think it's a struggle for all of those things, right? We're not represented necessarily in the classroom. The teaching force is not representative of the kids that we serve. There is a cultural incompetence around these things. I mean, we are not terribly critical in education about our actions. And I think we're just at a reckoning. I really do. I don't know if Hatcher agrees with that, but I think we're really at a point where we're going to have to look at what we do, how we do, and change. This pandemic, or the distance learning for educators, it has allowed us into families' homes in a way that we were not given access before. And parents who may previously have felt like some barriers to the building, right, had opportunity to see what was happening in that classroom. Absolutely. Right? That's empowering. That changes the conversation. So I'm hopeful, I'm hopeful, as inconvenient as folks felt like this pandemic was for me, like sitting in the space as an educator, it allowed me to have those 1-minute conversations. Mm-hmm. Truthfully, like, well, why did you do that? Let's talk about why that happened. Why did you feel like that was the best course of action? Did you think about what you said? Did you think about the fact that the parent could hear you speak to their child like that? Why did you think it was okay to talk to the child like that? What was the child doing? When we talk about disrupt, like all of these things, who knew an unintended benefit, right? This has opened the door to a lot of that. But I think for Black folks, we turned over because we were looking for freedom. And if we're looking around and we're listening, we were listening to other folks say education is freedom. I think we bought into that and believe that.
Mm-hmm.
Shout out to the chat, because it seems like the minute we are about to pivot and transition to another topic, they have already beat us there. So shout out to the folks that are in the chat. But there's a couple things that are coming up for me in those last comments. One is a call to action. We're talking about agency. I would say, as a fellow educator, I need you. Right? Black sister, black brother out there, I need you. I need you in the classroom. I need you as an administrator to join and lock arms with me, right, in this struggle, because I really think that it's going to take us, right? But until we own our own institutions, it's going to take us getting within inside the walls of those institutions to be able to actually make a difference. So one, I hear a call to action. But for two, for some reason, what's resonating with me and what's coming up is this word assimilation. And so I think that Shantae talked about this, is that my baby can read, my baby can do the academics. I don't know if my baby can navigate white culture. And I think that every time my baby shows up there, what's really happening is you're trying to socialize my student into becoming more unlike himself. I'll say it in that way. Someone mentioned in the chat, miseducation of the Negro. And I know that we had a closing question around that. And I'm willing to stay on for a couple minutes to make sure we get to that question. Michael Hatcher, if you want to go ahead and tee that up for us. I want
to ask a couple questions here. So, because I still haven't gotten an answer to my question, what is school right now? But I'm going to reframe that question in another way then, because you said assimilation, right? At the end of, after the big boat ride, the Ma'afa, the kidnap, torture, murder, rape, when this country just said, oh, you know what, we're not going to rape y'all anymore. Well, not as much. We're not going to kill, well, not as much. Okay, at least you can go walk around without us beating the crap out of you, right? Like, at the end of that, nobody asked Black people what we wanted to do next. It was paternalism. That decision was made for us. That decision was made that you want to assimilate, but it might not have been true, right? Some people might have wanted to go back to the continent. Some people might have wanted to, isolate themselves somewhere within the country and do their own thing without being bothered by the other people. But we were never asked. And so along with those three goals of education for Black people, right, that, disenfranchisement, social inefficiency, and social immobility, there was the de facto belief that Black people should assimilate into this country, right? I'm gonna get on a soapbox for 2 seconds, then I'm gonna get off it. That is the core idea of colonialism in this country, that colonialism was good for the colonized and the colonizer, right? Somehow, by beating your butt, see how I said that, and raping you and torturing you, we made your life better. So my question is still on the table after that soapbox. What's school doing for us now? Because everything we've talked about is normative. Everything we've talked about is in the future, or I don't like this to happen to my kid, but what does school do? What does it do? That's still a question. Anybody?
I think, just speaking from personal experience, what school is doing currently for my child has a lot to do with Kamar's Umoja program. School for my child currently is instilling a sense of identity. It's instilling literacy. It's instilling tools to navigate. Like Kamar said, my son went K through 5th at a predominantly white school with very few teachers who looked like him. He did not have one teacher of color K through 5th. The middle school that he's at currently, the staff reflects him, the students reflect him. So I can only speak for my son's current school about what school is doing for our children. I can't speak for anybody else's. But currently for him, it's instilling the things that I mentioned. And I think that's primarily because of the school that we hand picked for him. He was not zoned to go to the school that he's going to. But again, I think that's something that parents need to dig a little deeper to find out which school can give those kids the things that they want instilled in them.
I think that schools for Black kids, we over-identify, we over-surveil, we marginalize.
over punish.
Oh yeah, we're punitive. We adultify behavior.
Yes.
We, unfortunately, and this, I mean, obviously this isn't applicable in every single circumstance. But I think to your point, Shantae, like if folks are not vigilant, it happens more often than not. We ignore what they're bringing. We think of kids as empty vessels. And if they don't fit into the parameters that we have established, you know, there is very much a systematic breaking down of who they are. And so they feel no agency. I mean, you talk about agency, they don't have any sense of agency. No sense of like how to advocate for themselves. It's funny, you said assimilate, Kamar. I was thinking more advocate for himself. Like that's what he's learning to do. Like it's cool to be whoever he is, and he can navigate those spaces as an advocate for himself. Mm-hmm. I don't think that we do that. We don't do that consistently, and we don't do that consistently. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So and I make the argument, you know, why should you come to school? It's not to learn how to read. You know, it's not to learn how to read. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so for our parents and caregivers, there's another call of action when you get off of this live stream this evening. Look your baby in the eye and let them know that they bring something special to the table. Look them in the eye and let them know that at home we know that you're special, even if the world doesn't acknowledge that, right? Put some cocoa butter on your hands in the morning, right? And when you're greasing them down on the way to school, let them know that you love them and there's something special about them, right? There's something in the melanin, right? That there's something there, right? So, Michael, I never call you Michael. I always call you Hatcher, right? However, as we're winding this down, do you want to make the point really quickly around, I think Dr. Carter G. Woodson actually has some foresight into this question around if we decided to go towards more of an assimilation view of participating in quote unquote the structure, that might have some consequences for us.
Yeah, I mean, Carter G. Woodson, even in the beginning of the miseducation of the Negro, let me just say this real quick, and you know, because I don't think we get a lot of time to discuss how brilliant this brother was. So I just want to say this to give him his props. The miseducation of the Negro was not written to talk about K-12 education. Let me just say that, right? It was written to talk about higher ed. And I think Carter G. Woodson, if I was going to thumbnail his point, was Black people go to white finishing schools and get finished. Just putting that out there. But one of the things he said in the book that I thought was really important was he said, pursuing the same education for Black students that you pursue for white students gets a nominal equality at best. Right? You can't do the same thing for Black students that you do for other students and expect them to somehow magically get more. If you want Black kids to get more or to get out of the situation or to find their literacy or their liberation, you have to do something else, something different. And he was a strong advocate against having, you know, the same thing for the Black kids that he were having for everybody else. He felt like we needed to do something else. But of course, in the end, he lost out. And so I guess that's the last question, if we have time. What is something else to you? If you had the magic wand, you've heard the magic wand question, you could wave it and education for Black kids would change, what would it be that would change for you? What would make them literate? See the look on your face, Chris. Maybe you want to go first.
I was thinking, I'm sorry. I'm like processing. Sorry. That's all in my face. You keep saying what would make them literate. And I think they are. So it's not that we're going to make them literate. I think the onus is on us. The onus is on the educator. And actually, let me say educator rather than teacher, because you never know. Anyone who interacts with a child can change the trajectory, right? I mean, for good or bad. So we need to be really mindful. That's like a super powerful word, to be an educator, to influence, like influencer. Right? Influencer, facilitator. Sherpa, kind of like, how can I, you tell me the course you want to take, and together we will figure out the best way to get there. So I was like, what was your question again? I think that maybe that's the responsibility, right? That's what we need to do.
Yeah, I appreciate your reframing. Let me reframe my reframe to get back to your reframing.
Okay.
So with education having this outcome being assimilationist, it seems like that we're good with just letting Black kids be readers. I agree with you. They come in with all kinds of literacies, all kinds of genius, all kinds of brilliance, but there's no goal for Black kids to express that brilliance and that genius within the school, right? Schools don't make Black businesses, right? When I was a kid, I was taught a lot about critical infrastructure. I'm gonna say that term, right? Black people need to control where their power comes from. Black people need to control where their water comes from. Black people need to control where their food comes from. Nobody talked to me about like being able to interface with white people and talk to them about Chaucer. Like nobody in my family talked to me about that. They talked to me about, hey, one day you should be in a position where you can control all the outcomes in your own life. And so I guess when I say literacy, I mean, how do we create the systems that do that? What is the system that teaches a Black kid, hey, it's more important for you to own a basketball team than play on a basketball team? It's more important for you to grow your own food than to buy your food from somebody else. It's more important for you to commune with other people to get your own power, right? And I do mean like electricity right now, not power in the bigger sense. That's the question I mean by literacy, because I really appreciate you reframing that, because yes, kids do come in with literacy, but I'm wondering, how do we reframe that literacy so it serves Black ends, not serves assimilation and the 3 goals of education for Black people? Sorry, that was a long reframing.
And perhaps it might not be the space, right? and I actually think that I think we got to be honest about that, and I think that is ultimately around this agency conversation, is that we could wait and continue to hope and push and advocate, but if it's not changing fast enough, then the onus then becomes on us, as Shantae said, right? And as Chris has said, is that how do we expand the role and definition of the educator? And I think it goes back to what community, right, is around, what ecosystem is around the student and the family to support that student and that child outside of the walls of education. And I think perhaps that are some inroads and some breadcrumbs back to our elders and ancestors around. It wasn't necessarily about getting in the building. It was about using that as just one particular tool that we had in the larger scheme of broader things that we were doing as Black people to surround our babies. And I think that is how we get back to it. It's not an end all be all ending with education, expanding that role of educator, right? I got educated at church on Sundays. I went to Catholic schools and we was Baptist on Sundays, right? And I wasn't feeling the energy and the vibe. The education was cool, but on Sunday is where I felt at home, right? And I say I wasn't born with a silver spoon, but in Oakland I got golden game, right? And that golden game did not come from, right, the 4 walls of the institution of education. I got that outside in my community, and I'm grateful for that. And so we need to get back to figuring out how we can give golden game. Although our schools are not doing that, we can do that.
Kamar up here preaching.
I know. You know what? It's cyclical, right? So if we suppose that kids don't come to school, or if we have the kids do not come to school empty vessels, that there is a literacy that they are bringing, and so the onus is on us to figure out how do we co-create, right? Help this child co-create some meaning for themselves, and they learn to stand as their own advocate. They go back actually then into the community and they begin asking those questions. How come we don't grow our own food? How come we don't have these power? So I mean, there is that. It is a reciprocal relationship. I think it could be, when it works well, there's a reciprocity, and there is some benefit. We just haven't, it doesn't happen. I'll go back to this because I can't say it never happens, but it doesn't happen consistently enough to feel like a real practice. So when it does happen, we are like, yes, that's what it should be. How do we get there? And then we're like constantly chasing that.
Right. Can I ask a follow-on question to that? Because I think that's super important. I really like the way you said that, but it's interesting. As a teacher, as somebody who's been in a classroom with a bunch of kids, why don't we assume that the teacher's the empty vessel? Right? Because we know that these kids come to school with all kinds of stuff, and this teacher's from outside the community. Why don't we push for teachers to come in like, you don't know anything? You've got to learn to navigate this space. instead of, oh my God, everybody's got to norm themselves to you.
That's actually really good.
Right. Like the most powerful thing I ever heard someone say, I don't know, I haven't seen her in years. Her name was Maria Carroll. She used to do Math Matters when I taught in Oakland. And I was taking a training with her. And this like literally changed my life as a teacher. It really did. Cause I was like, what? It never even considered it. She said that she asked a kid, what did I say that confused you? I was like, you've got to be kidding.
She got
Because here's the thing, as the teacher cannot assume to be the expert. How can we possibly be, right? There is no such thing as mastery. There's just, there's just an evolution, right? You are always acquiring. So what that did for me as a teacher, it actually alleviated a lot of pressure. Because how can I possibly be right? But it also gave me space to ask kids questions. And it created space then for kids to answer. Like, this is what you said. Because this is what you said that confused me. And I would be like, well, shoot, let me think of something different. Give me a minute. Let me think of something different. The authenticity of that. Right. The authenticity of the question, the answer, the recognizing that it wasn't about me, because you don't teach for your ego.
Mm-hmm.
No.
It changed my entire practice. I mean, it changed my entire practice as an educator. And I try to sit in that space even now. When people, you're an administrator, I'm like, no, I'm a teacher. And as frustrating as it can be sometimes, it is very much a beautiful struggle. So I hope that, but folks, recognize that, teachers recognize that we, our responsibility is not to like pour knowledge into kids, but it really is to like co-create.
Yeah.
Oh.
And before we transition into, I can't believe how fast an hour goes, right? Before we transition into bringing this thing home, I wanted to know, Shantae, have you ever been asked as a parent to sit on an interview panel to hire a teacher that would be in your child's classroom?
Absolutely not.
Okay.
Wow.
Absolutely not. Never.
Okay. All right. So before we can transform, right, how the individuals are interacting with our students, we got to be able to ask ourselves, how do we also have input and control about who gets placed in front of our students? And oftentimes, right, if we don't have that, who better knows your son than you, right? You're going to get that vibe in that interview that says, you know what, at least for my child, I don't know if that's the right fit, or, hey, that's a tremendous fit. Go ahead and hire that person because I know that they're going to bring value. And so I think, again, going back to the community, right, and linking arms, emoji style, right, together in unity and saying, we want some changes. And that is one recommendation that we can make. I know that both of the administrators on this call, right, and this live stream, reach out to parents and ask for feedback and input around communal process around hiring. Hatcher, you have, why don't we maybe transition to final thoughts? And then there's some homework that we want to give. We wouldn't be educators without giving homework. So there's some homework that we want to give. And we got a couple announcements on the way out the door. But Hatcher, final thoughts.
So, I've been thinking about what you guys said, Shantae and Christine. I hope it's okay to call you guys that. But one of the things that I've learned in my long time in education, too long maybe, is that you can't attack somebody's beliefs with facts, right? And I think that's what we're talking about with the teachers. And so if somebody says, hey, I believe the earth is flat, all you can bring to that conversation is understanding. Why do you believe that? Right? Too often people go, well, it can't possibly be flat because if you watch a boat sail away or if you look at it from space, that's not what you're going to do is shut that person down. And I think that's something that teachers haven't learned to do, especially with kids who don't look like them. Right? When a kid comes in and says, hey, you're hurting my feelings. Hey, you're not giving me anything I need. They're like, well, that can't be true because no. Understanding. Why is it that I'm not giving you what you need? Like Chris was saying, right? Like Shantae is saying, hey, we'd like to have you in this space so you can share with us and talk to us about what we need. Not just tell you what you feel like you need. Because that feels deeply colonial to me, or paternal, telling people what they need. And you don't know. But I'll leave it alone. That's my final thought.
Shantae, final thoughts?
Whew. There's a lot to unpack. my brain is now itching about why no one's asked me to interview a teacher. You know, it's quite the opposite in the Berkeley Unified School District, where, you know, when my kids went into kindergarten, they went through 3 days of rotation. They went from teacher to teacher to see where they would fit best, which teachers could, you know, how they could, I don't want to use the word assimilate, but the teachers literally go through a process of filtering the kids to see who would work best for their classrooms. And if that was the other way around, I think that things would be a lot different.
Christine, last final thoughts, if I can call you that.
You, of course. I never have a final thought. Like, I'm gonna have to just kind of process and then something will come to me later. But I want to thank you for, you know, the conversation. It's provoked. It's the thought-provoking conversation. I appreciate it, and I see this very much as integral to who I am and what I do and what I hope to do and what I hope to do better. So thank you.
Thank you.
Black Prism Group might not always have the answers,
Nope.
but we are committed to having the right dialogue and conversations that does exactly that, right? To have you a lingering thought after a live stream that says, how do I go back and do something different? Or how do I look at this particular situation a little bit different? And so to that end, for next week, we'll be sharing some actual tips and skills and tricks that parents can use as they interface with adults in the buildings that their kids go to. So tune in for that. Same time, same day next week. And then lastly, if you are getting value from this conversation, bring a friend next time. Right? Let's try to double the live stream numbers. And then also you can follow us. You can see the ticker at Black Prism Group on a lot of the social media pages to stay in the loop. And lastly, we want to thank two people. First, we want to thank Jamidra Brown, who's doing all of the stuff in the background, who hasn't gotten any props and feedback tonight. But thank you so much for your help in putting on this production. And then lastly, my brother and my friend, Dr. Charles Cole, who had the vision for this months back and was committed to doing it. And shout out to that brother and all the great work that he's doing across the country for students of color through energy converters. And with that, y'all, keep your head up and we'll see y'all next time. Peace.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.